January 3rd, 1942. It's pilot David Tex Hill's first mission for the Flying Tigers. Tex Hill left the Navy to volunteer. He's eager for action. He and 3 other American pilots aimed their P-40 Tomahawks toward the Japanese airfield at Raheng, Thailand. The plan? Arrive at dawn and devastate enemy aircraft on the ground.
Jack Newkirk, who was the squadron leader, and he had Bert Chrisman on his wing, and Jim Howard leading the element, and I was on Jim's wing.
Shortly after takeoff, one of the P-40s radios in.
Bert Chrisman had engine trouble, so he had to turn back.
Crispin heads for home. The 3 remaining P-40s continue on. They're over the target at first light. They make a left turn to align with the field and begin a shallow dive. The pilots line up one behind the other, about 950 feet apart, known as a string formation.
They would bend it over, which means to put your airplane in a dive, and accelerate as they came down to strafe the aircraft on the ground.
Their 1,200 horsepower Allison engines scream as they dive towards the airfield at 300 miles per hour. Jim Howard strafes the area, raking the airfield with machine gun fire. Tex Hill dives after him, preparing his own strafing run. But the run is cut short. Tex sees a Ki-27 Nate at 10 o'clock streaking in right onto Howard's tail. Jim Howard strafes the airfield. And the Nate pumps lead into him. Tex closes on the Nate's tail and lines him up in his crosshairs.
Our ammo is loaded with every 5th round was a tracer. So it looked like just a big hose, you know, going out there. So I just looking right through the windscreen and following those tracers, and he blew up right in front of me.
He blasts through the churning fireball. At the other end of the airfield, Jim Howard pulls up from his strafing run, intact. It's Tex's first victory, but there's no time to celebrate. Another Nate is at 12 o'clock high, directly in front of him.
When I saw that other guy who was starting to make a pass on me, then I turned into him head on.
It's a defining moment for Tex, when he would demonstrate perfectly the strengths of the P-40 over the Japanese Nate. The P-40 was built by the Curtiss Aircraft Company in Buffalo, New York. Clare Chenault obtained 100 that were originally destined for the British RAF. The P-40B was rugged, could reach 378 miles per hour, and was heavily armed with 2 50 caliber nose-mounted machine guns and 4 wing-mounted 30 calibers. It also had thick armor around the engine and cockpit to protect the pilot. Its opponent is the Nakajima Ki-27 Nate, which entered service in 1936. The Nate had an air-cooled radial engine and fixed landing gear. Its top speed was 305 miles per hour, and it was armed with one 12.7 millimeter and one 7.7 millimeter nose-mounted machine gun. The P-40 had better firepower and armor, but it was heavy and could not turn with the much lighter Japanese Nate. These fundamental differences in aircraft design philosophy were at the core of Clare Chenault's approach to dogfighting.
And the type of attacks he typically set up was to come in at high altitude, make screaming diving attacks against Japanese formations, take the energy that they built up, zoom climb up to a high altitude again, and come back around. He told his pilots, do not dogfight with the Japanese airplanes. It was certain death.
Facing a Japanese Nate head-on, Tex Hill applies these tactics. He knows the way to dogfight with a Nate is not to dogfight at all. Instead, he'll charge him with machine guns blazing. Tex Hill is here, The Nate is here. Tex will pull up into the Nate, aim towards him, and attack him head on.
I'm pulling into him, and of course I had the firepower on the head on.
The fighters close at over 600 miles per hour. The Nate peppers Tex's aircraft, but the P-40's armor plate does its job.
Eventually, the lighter armored Nate couldn't take the punishment and ended up spiraling out of control.
The Nate spirals into the jungle. The fight's over.
I had no idea where Howard and Newkirk were. I just headed right home, get out of that area.
Suddenly, Tex feels an intense vibration. His plane is shaking, unlike anything he's ever felt before.
The instruments are probably just almost shaking out of the panel itself, and he's probably wondering if he's even going to make it back to base.
He finally reaches Mingaladon Airfield, where Howard and Newkirk have also landed safely. He looks at his plane.
He shot 33 holes in my airplane. Some of his bullets stuck in my prop, and it threw the prop out of balance. And I thought the engine was coming out of the airplane.
The Flying Tiger's first offensive mission against the Japanese is a success. 4 enemy fighters destroyed in the air, 4 bombers on the ground. Kamikaze. A terrifying weapon conceived in desperation. Japanese pilots committed to an unthinkable mission, a violent end as a human bomb. Now, through startling computer animation, an unprecedented view of these suicide attacks. On deck with horrified American sailors. And inside the Kamikaze's cockpits, as suicide airplanes and rockets hurtle towards oblivion. April 16, 1945, the destroyer USS Laffey, accompanied by support ships LCS-51 and 116, is patrolling waters 50 miles north of Okinawa. The ship is on radar picket duty, a new defensive tactic that positions a ring of destroyers around the main invasion force to create an early warning system against incoming aircraft. Laffey is manning station number 1, the closest to Japan. The last 4 destroyers to patrol this area were slammed by kamikazes. Ari Futridis is a 19-year-old quartermaster on Laffey.
We knew that being the first in the line of defense was dangerous, but we didn't realize to what extent.
At 7:44 a.m., radar picks up a solitary Val dive bomber 6 miles out, approaching off the port bow. Laffey's 5-inch guns quickly open fire. At 3 miles, the Val jettisons its bomb and turns away.
Probably came in just to look over the situation and then took off.
Then, at 8:29 a.m., a swarm of 50 Japanese planes appears on the horizon. The attackers circle ominously, like vultures. The USS Laffey is about to face the most unrelenting kamikaze attack in history. Al Doris watches the terrifying procession from his 40mm gun mount.
Well, they were just about every place you looked. You know, you could see a Japanese plane.
Suddenly, 4 Vals break formation and bear down on Laffey.
They were coming in low on the water, and somebody on our gun said, "Well, here they come. They're coming now."
Two head for the starboard bow. Captain Julius Beckton orders Laffey to come about, hard left 30 degrees, to bring all his guns broadside to the attackers. Laffey unleashes an anti-aircraft barrage. First, the main battery, 5-inch radar-directed guns.
And then they get in a little closer than the 40s. And they get a little closer, then the 20 millimeters will start rattling at them. We just try to stop them as best we could.
Laffey splashes the first two attackers, but the other two Vals wheel around to come in from the stern. One Val sheds pieces of fuselage until its fixed landing gear catches the water. Tracers converge on the second Val. Laffey is barely spared a moment's respite before a Judy screams in from 90 degrees to starboard. Judys are a fast dive bomber, top speed 340 miles per hour. But this one's heading in at a poor attack angle. All of Laffey's guns can train their fire on the Kamikaze. But immediately, another Judy barrels in on the opposite side. The destroyer's top speed is 35 knots, and it can turn sharply. Captain Beckton orders 30 degrees hard right rudder.
This diving Judy was also strafing with its guns, trying to take out personnel on the command bridge. And so we had briefly a two-way gunnery duel between an oncoming Kamikaze and the defending gunners.
The Judy is no match for Laffey's main battery. The aircraft disintegrates. But its bomb detonates in the water, spewing killing shrapnel over exposed areas of the ship. Planes are coming in from every angle, using specialized tactics developed over months of experience. USS Laffey has taken repeated kamikaze hits, and at least 30 Japanese planes are still waiting to pounce. Now, not a moment too soon, Marine Corps F-4U Corsairs scream in.
We looked up and saw them. Well, that took a lot off of us because they kept them busy from then on.
The F-4U Corsair was one of the most advanced naval fighters of the Pacific War. Its distinctive bent wing derived from the clearance needed from its huge 13-foot propeller. The shape also reduced aerodynamic drag.
The Corsair had a clear advantage over any Japanese aircraft. High speed, tough, very maneuverable, take a lot of punishment.
Time and again, the Corsair pilots risked their own lives, chasing the kamikazes down through Laffey's unceasing anti-aircraft fire. One is hot on the tail of a Ki-43 Oscar.
This Japanese plane was coming in and the Corsair come up underneath of him. Tried to raise him up to get him away from the ship.
The Oscar shears off the port yard arm. The Corsair hits the ship's radar antenna and careens away, badly damaged. The courageous American pilot manages to bail out. Suddenly, a Val looms menacingly towards the bridge, Ari Futridi's battle station.
It was very vivid in my mind. There was a huge bomb under his belly. And as he approached, the bomb got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I really felt at that point that that was going to be a statistic.
But at the last second, gun mount 52 traverses from port to starboard.
He hit the plane directly on the nose and it disintegrated. That I remember very vividly.
Finally, the 22nd and last attacker, a Judy, streaks in. A Corsair blasts the Kamikaze before it could strike the ship. Now, only the roar of the Corsair's 2,000 horsepower engines fill the sky. After 80 minutes of non-stop combat, 6 Kamikaze strikes and 4 bomb hits, incredibly, Laffey is still afloat. Of a crew of 355, 32 men have died and 71 more are wounded. But the destroyer will survive to fight another day. Outnumbered American fighter pilots battle marauding Japanese airmen to control the skies over a sweltering Pacific island called Guadalcanal. During a grueling 6-month slugfest, their combat in the sky will help decide the course of the Pacific War. August 7th, 1942, America launches its first amphibious assault of World War II. Over 11,000 U.S. Marines storm ashore at Guadalcanal. The Marines quickly gain a foothold on the island. By the second day, they take the Japanese airstrip, renaming it Henderson Field. The Japanese bring in thousands of fresh troops to Guadalcanal and attack the Americans relentlessly, trying to drive them off the island. The Marines fight off attacks, while desperately trying to prepare Henderson Field for operations. Japanese tractors and equipment are commandeered to improve the small crushed coral runway. Bomb damage is repaired, and PSP, perforated steel planking, is hurriedly laid down. After 2 weeks, they finish the airstrip and fly in 19 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 12 SBD Dauntless dive bombers.
It was only because of the ability of the Americans to place aircraft on Henderson Field to protect the supply ships bringing in reinforcements and supplies to the Marines on Guadalcanal that the island could be held.
Because the Allied code name for Guadalcanal is Cactus, Henderson Field becomes the home of the tiny Cactus Air Force, at first consisting of just 43 pilots and ground crew. The men of Henderson Field soon discover it isn't just the enemy making their lives hell.
The island was a fly-infested, dirty, stinking, blood-soaked, damned island that was just dangerous to even walk on the beaches because there was so much unexploded ammunition around.
The pilots and ground crew live in mud-floored tents. The latrine is a trench with a log seat, and the bathtub is the Lunga River, complete with crocodiles and leeches. The flyers of the Cactus Air Force are outnumbered and short on supplies. Their fighter, the F-4F Wildcat, can't match the agility of the enemy Zero. But a big advantage for the Cactus Air Force is that they are commanded by a born leader in 27-year-old John Smith. Smith's an aggressive dogfighter and skilled tactician.
He always preached and devised his tactics around you have to pit your strengths against the enemy's weakness. And that is as true today as it ever was since the first airplane ever flew in combat.
Now, on August 30th, 1942, Captain John Smith and his men are protecting Guadalcanal from approaching bombers and fighters. In his 8 days on the island, Smith has already scored 5 kills, making him an ace. Today, he's racked up 1 more. Then he spots another Zero below, breaking from a cloud. The Zero is here. Smith is here, high above him. He plans to use the Wildcat's diving speed to try and drop behind the Japanese plane. Smith first rolls inverted, then dives. This creates positive G-force instead of negative G's.
You roll on your back, pull aft on the stick, and pull positive G's so you're pushed into your seat. You can be able to pull more G's, which means you can pull your nose downhill faster.
The maneuver works. Smith rolls back over, then levels out behind the Zero and fires. The Wildcat's 6 50 caliber guns deliver 200 rounds in a 4-second burst. White-hot, phosphorus-filled incendiary bullets ignite the Zero's fuel tank. But as Smith arcs away from his second victim, the predator becomes the prey. A Japanese Zero closes in on Smith from dead ahead. High above the green jungle canopy of Guadalcanal, the planes converge at over 600 miles per hour.
Think of a high-speed game of chicken going directly at your target, and no one wants to flinch, because if you flinch, you become defensive. And you have to be pointing at the target to shoot him, so it has to be head-to-head.
Once in range, the Zero opens up with his 20-millimeter cannon. Smith answers with his 50 caliber machine guns.
It's basically that slugfest all the way to the merge. Who's going to flinch first, or who's going to blow up first?
Both planes are taking hits, but Smith's Wildcat has thicker armor, and he's withstanding the blows.
And then the overwhelming firepower of the Navy airplane cut this guy into ribbons. He exploded. And then what Smith did is dump the nose over very hard, very abruptly, and flew underneath the debris field and escaped.
The Zero has made a fatal error. He fought the Wildcat's fight. Built by Grumman Aircraft, the Wildcat is first flown in 1937. The rugged plane features cockpit armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. These tanks are coated with layers of rubber that expand and reseal if they're punctured. The Wildcat faces the most famous of all Japanese aircraft, the deadly Mitsubishi A6M30. The lightweight Zero can outturn and outclimb the Wildcat, a lethal advantage in a dogfight. But its thin armor protection and lack of self-sealing fuel tanks means it can't survive a slugging match with the tougher Wildcat.
Essentially, in fighter versus fighter combat, the difference between the Wildcat and the Zero is the difference between a battle axe and a rapier. They can both be effective, but they're used somewhat differently.
The Zero is faster, more maneuverable, and can outclimb the Wildcat, while the Grumman is tougher, more heavily armed, and can outdive the Zero.
Wildcat pilots in general would want to avoid the turning fight with the Zero. That would not be their fight. The Wildcat with its 650 cal machine guns, heavy body armor, heavy armor around the engine cowling, preferred head-on attacks, frontal attacks, and it would just basically plow through that Zero.
The air battle of August 30th is a resounding victory for Smith and his pilots. They shoot down 14 of the 22 attacking Zeros. The Japanese bombers the Zeros were protecting retreat before reaching Guadalcanal.